Pat Robertson of 700 Club fame was talking recently about polygamy.
In order to populate the race, it was necessary for an abundance of children. So there was no stricture about it. Look, you got David. So David has 5 or 6 wives. He's got Abigail, and he's got this one and that and the other one. And God said to him, when he sinned, he said, listen, I gave you Saul's kingdom, and I gave you his wives to your bosom, and if that wasn't enough, I'd have given you a whole lot more of them. Now, that's what God says in the Word. Now, I don't know at what point polygamy was wrong. It's just somehow along the way, the New Testament began to say a man should have one wife, wife should have one husband, and they should cling to each other, and the twain would be, one flesh.
Above all else, I find it interesting that Pat here seems to be saying that yes, the definition of marriage is not set in stone and can change to fit the circumstances of the society at the time. He claims that while polygamous marriages were normal and accepted before, times have changed. According to him, back in the biblical days, both when the world was only populated by a handful of people, or when the human population had recently been devastated by a large flood, polygamy was necessary to repopulate the earth. But then the rules changed, so this was no longer the accepted form. He is, surprisingly, right. Ancient civilizations were in what could be considered a human arms race, meaning the civilization that had the most people had the best chance to survive. So polygamy was accepted and encouraged, while same-sex relations, which have a much less chance of creating offspring, were discouraged, usually in some pretty severe ways. These days, the opposite is true. The most prosperous nations are strong, stable, and do not need large numbers to keep their consistency. Not only can prosperous countries survive without a high birth rate, they can thrive on a lower one. So Pat, please explain to me why it is, if the definition of marriage can change in the past, why have you been so resistant to change the definition of marriage now?
Same-sex marriage among homosexuals. You mark my words, this is just the beginning of a long downward slide in relation to all the things that we consider to be abhorrent.
There is precedent, you actually admit, that marriage does not need to be the same for all time. And according to your logic, if polygamous marriage was good for an underpopulated world, wouldn't same-sex marriage be good for the current world with its overpopulation? I personally have no qualms about any polyamorous relationship. I myself don't have any desire to be in one, and neither does my wife. But for those who want one, it shouldn't be a problem as long as all the partners involved are consenting to it, and none are being coerced into it. But that should be true for any marriage. Minors, for example, should not be able to give consent to enter into any marriage, and one where an adult has power over a child automatically should be seen as coercion. The only major difficulty would be with the law to make sure that all parties can enter and exit from the marriage contract equally, with no members with any less legal rights than others, and new rules for estates need to be devised so it will be fair to all. Pat, honestly, if you could admit that the definition of marriage can and has changed in the past, which you have said happened, why are you so adamant that it must remain the same now?